We've covered a lot of different topics with Mongoose so far. There's one last big topic that I want to talk about, and then we're going to move on to our next project where we're going to make use of all these different types of operations that we've been looking at. So let's talk about this last topic and kind of wrap up this section and then continue on to the next one. I'm going to open up my read test file. So let's find that one. Where is it? Reading test. There we go. So here's my reading test file. And so this is one of the first tests that we looked at, or one of the first tests that we actually wrote. If you recall, we had a bunch of different tests in here with all the different ways to fetch users out of our user collection. In this case, just two. We were making use of find and find one. I want to focus a little bit more on find for a moment. I want you to think kind of carefully about find. Okay, let's look at a diagram of what our user collection might look like at some point in time. So I know that the text on here is really small. All I'm really trying to convey by this diagram right here is that as we start to use our application or deploy it out to the wild and users start signing up for our app or whatever it is that they do, we might end up with a whole bunch of resources in a single collection. Now there's definitely nothing inherently wrong by that, right? Like Mongo data collections can get somewhat arbitrarily large without us really having to do anything special. But I want to ask you a question. Okay, I want to ask you a question. What would happen if we wanted to put together a web page where we just displayed about 6 different users on the page at a time? So maybe this would be like search results for friend requests or something like that on Facebook, right? We don't want to show a big list of like 1,000 different users all at once. We probably only want to show a small handful of records at once. And then to make sure that the user can navigate around and look back on the list and look at like the next 6 results, we might show them a previous and a next button on here as well. So this is something that we don't really have the tools yet for handling. We don't really have the ability to limit the number of records that come back in a query. And we don't really have any idea on how to implement some type of pagination like this, where we can look back at like the last 6 records or look forward at the next 6 records. So in this section, we're going to kind of try to figure out how this would exactly work with Mongoose. Implementing pagination in this fashion utilizes 2 query modifiers that we're going to be talking about. The first is skip and the next is limit. So skip and limit are 2 query modifiers that we can use to implement pagination. Let's take a look at how these would work. There we go. So skip and limit. In this diagram, we still have a big old list of different users in here. The purpose of skip is to say, all right, I acknowledge that my collection will have some giant number of records inside of it. By default, whenever we make our queries, we start off with a skip value of 0. As soon as we start to increment a skip value, that means that in our query result, we will skip the first 15 records. On the other hand, we have access to limit. Limit does exactly what you might think. It limits the number of results that we'll get back from a query. So if we apply this skip and limit system to the diagram that we just saw, this one right here, we might be using a skip of, well, I don't know. You can't quite tell by just looking at a list like this. A skip is kind of arbitrarily long. If we were on the first result or first page of results, then maybe this button down here, instead of saying previous, it would say, like cannot go back anymore. So if we had something like that, which implies that we're on the first page of results, then that would mean that we have a skip value of 0. So we did not skip any records. We're at the very start of the collection. However, we could definitely tell that this would have been generated by using a limit value of 6, because we only see 6 records on the screen at this point in time. So by using skip and limit, we can essentially set up a window of results that would come back from our users collection. Let's take a quick break and then come back in the next section and write a test or two to figure out exactly how skip and limit works.